The music made its slow, stately loop, and the arch of pale roses held its breath with everyone else. Elena Whitaker had taken 2 steps into the aisle when her bouquet began to slip. She caught it, fingers trembling, and felt the weight of 100 careful choices tug at the silk. Somewhere behind the veil, her eyes found the last row, the one nobody photographs. A woman sat there alone in a simple lavender dress, hands folded like she was trying not to take up space. Her hair, once unbroken braids, now threaded with gray, framed a face that had always known how to keep secrets. Elena could have swallowed the moment and walked on. She had learned to do that most of her life. Swallowing was the first lesson in the Whitaker household. But the sight of the woman loosed a knot that had lived beneath her ribs since she was 11, and that knot refused to be tightened again. Her friend Nora whispered, "Breathe, Len," from behind. But Elena's breath was already somewhere else, curling through a Charleston morning from a decade and a half ago, when a lullaby had chased away the kind of fear that doesn't hide under beds. She stepped out of the aisle. Silk scuffed on the wooden floor. Murmurs rose like the rustle of marsh grass in wind. Benjamin Cole Ben, to everyone but the program, waited at the altar, his hands settling slowly at his sides, as if to give the moment a seat. The officiant's smile faltered into puzzlement. Elena kept walking until she reached the last row. "Marion," she said, and her voice folded on the name. The woman looked up, and the years fell out of her eyes as if someone had opened a window. "My baby bird," she whispered, the old nickname softening even the silence around them. Elena crouched, unnoticed by decor or manners, and put her forehead into the safe harbor of Marion's shoulder. All the rules about posture and powder and how not to cry evaporated like the scent of gardenias after rain. When she stood, she laced her fingers through Marion Holt's fingers and brought her into the aisle that had never been meant for her. "Walk with me," Elena said. They walked. People say a room can hold its breath. A lawn can too. Beneath hanging lanterns and draped ribbons, beneath the careful choice of blush over rose, beneath the way orchestras can sound like money, every guest watched a truth step forward, as if a house had opened a hidden door in front of them. Elena reached the altar and turned, the veil sliding on her shoulder like a wave receding. "This is the woman," she said, voice steadying itself like a hand on a rail, "who taught me how to be brave in a house that prized being quiet." Her mother, Caroline, sat in the front row with her back straight enough to pass inspection. Her father, Edward, shifted, one thumb worrying the edge of his linen handkerchief. No one else moved. Elena raised their joined hands and went on. "When I was small and afraid of that big house, the kind of afraid that has nothing to do with monsters and everything to do with empty rooms. Marion sang to me. She braided my hair. She taught me to read the way some people teach prayer." Marion tried to tug her hand free with an embarrassed little smile. "Honey," she murmured, "you don't have to." "I do," Elena said, and the 2 words landed like something went finally where it belongs. "Because when I was 11, I woke up to trunks at the door and a plane ticket to Switzerland, and Marion was gone without a goodbye. I asked where she went. I wrote letters that never found a home. I kept a scrap of the world I knew, a tiny braid tied into a handkerchief with the letters M.H. stitched into the corner, and I pretended for years that silence was the same thing as being strong." The officiant blinked and straightened. He was no longer presiding over a ceremony. He was keeping company with a confession. Ben stood a little closer. Elena saw the courage in his eyes that had steadied her so many nights when memories came back with old boots on. She turned her face to Marion. "You belong here," she said. "Not at the edges, not in the last row." Here Ben stepped aside without instruction, and the three of them stood shoulder to shoulder at the altar. When the vows resumed, the words felt older and truer than what the programs had promised. Elena's voice didn't shake. It had shaken enough for one day. If someone had asked Elena to explain the shape of her childhood, she might have said it was a grand house drawn by a draftsman who forgot to put indoors. Everything looked perfect from the street. The Whitaker name on brass, the oaks guarding the drive, the afternoons where light turned the river into a knife of silver. But rooms were separated by more than walls. Her mother moved through them like a figure in a clock, at the precise hour, with the precise smile, with conversation as polished as the sideboard. Her father loved by providing, and believed love received through gratitude. Elena was not ungrateful. She learned the currency and paid on time. But she also learned to measure days in the distance between footsteps and the way a house can make a child's voice echo and erase itself at the same time. Marion changed that. She came when Elena was 3, small and sure-handed, 28, and already older than the world had allowed her to be. The agency sent her as help, but she carried into the big kitchen a kind of dignity that never apologizes for needing to sit down after a long day. She taught Elena the names of herbs before the names of designers. She defined home as the place where someone would notice if you were too quiet. She had a laugh that started in the chest and made its way out like something that knew where it was going. The lullaby, always the same low, steady tune, called the dark by its true name and then made peace with it. On the afternoon, Elena was summoned to the parlor and told about boarding school. The words sounded like an opportunity arranged lovingly on a silver tray. "It will make you worldly," Caroline said in that gentle voice that had never learned to be soft. "It will give you advantages," Edward added. The list of will stretched into the kind of future that impresses other people. Elena had looked toward the kitchen door, expecting Marion's, "Now hold on," expecting the little joke she always made when decisions came without invitations. The door stayed shut. The next morning, Marion's room was empty. The closet held the ghost of hangers. The lamp on the nightstand was dark at noon. Elena wandered into the laundry room and found a scrap of hair, a small braid Marion had woven at the ends of Elena's curls the night before when she'd tried to pass off a bedtime story as another lesson. Elena wrapped the braid in a handkerchief she found in Marion's drawer, the initials stitched in blue thread that had faded to sky. She kept it like a relic. She never learned that Marion had stood at the kitchen door for a long time that last night and touched the doorframe, whispering a blessing she remembered from her mother. At 12, Elena did not have words for how the heart makes a museum of its losses. She only knew a slow, careful erasing had been done, and grown-ups were proud of the clean lines left behind. Boarding school was a series of brilliant rooms with the temperature set a few degrees too cold. Elena excelled at Latin and at silence. She learned to make friends who would never ask certain questions. She learned the etiquette of letters, how to write home without writing anything at all. She learned how not to cry until the 5 minutes between lights out and sleep. She learned to sing in her head. At college, she found Nora, a roommate from a family loud with love and casseroles, who taught Elena the radical act of opening your fridge to someone else without apology. Soon after came Ben, with hands that made everything he touched seem less temporary. When he asked about Elena's family, she learned how to speak around them like a tree growing around a fence post. She did not mean to hide. She meant to survive in the manner she had practiced. She didn't say Marion's name. She couldn't. Not without dissolving the sculpture she had carved so carefully out of composure. It would have been easy to keep going. People build whole lives around whatever they learned to do first. At the reception, the band took a break and laughter made a trellis across the open-air tent. Elena stood from the head table and tapped the microphone. Gentle hush traveled like a breeze through the room. She was aware of the way the dress pulled at her ribs and the way confidence wears different clothes when it's born in public. "There's something I've never said out loud in a room like this," she began. Not because it wasn't true, but because truth makes a mess before it cleans. A few guests smiled in the way people do when they expect stories about mishandled vows or a rogue ring-bearer. She searched the back tables and found Marion, hands folded as if to keep them from reaching for anyone who might need a refill. "When I was a child," Elena continued, "the dark inside our big house was louder than the dark outside the windows. I thought courage meant being quiet in it. Marion taught me courage is letting someone hear that you're afraid." She took the handkerchief from the small pocket sewn into her gown. Nora's idea that had felt silly at the seamstress, vital now, and unfolded it with ordinary reverence. "I kept this," she said, the braid brittle but still itself, "because it was the only proof I had that love had been in that house." She walked down the steps with bare feet, the dress gathered in one hand, the cloth in the other, and knelt in front of Marion. "I think it belongs to you." Marion cupped the keepsake like a bird, and the room exhaled. Some people clapped, and then the sound died in the face of something too tender for applause. Later, when the first dance was announced, Elena lifted the microphone again. "Before I dance with my husband," she said, eyes shining toward Ben, "there's a dance I missed." She extended her hand to Marion. "Would you?" Marion's smile carried 30 years, the weight and the lightness of them. They swayed badly, which made it perfect. Cameras clicked for reasons no photographer expected when they took the job. From the corner of her eye, Elena saw Carolyn watching, her hand a white knot on the stem of her glass. She saw Edward listening to the music like it might tell him what to do next. It would be a long while before either of them learned how to repent without a speech. But beginnings are stubborn. They come even when nobody is ready. Ben found Elena under the lanterns later, where the night smelled like river and jasmine and something cut with memory. "You all right?" he asked. "I feel like I just closed a door and opened a window," she said. "That's a lot of architecture for one day." She laughed, and the laugh sounded like someone taking off the high heels of their heart and standing barefoot on kitchen tile. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Not permission." Partnership when she told him what she wanted to do first, a small trust for Marion, then a larger promise for women like her whose names existed only on the hinges of other people's lives. Ben didn't say it was generous. He said, "Of course," and meant it like a signed check. Before the night ended, Elena stood again at the microphone. "I've made a decision," she said into the soft, murmuring quiet. "Tomorrow, I'm establishing something called the Quiet Hands Fund. It will start with a trust for Marion and grow into a foundation that tells and honors the stories of the people who hold our families together without ever appearing in our portraits. We're going to offer counseling, legal help, and time. Time most of all," she nodded toward Marion. "Because time is what's taken first and hardest." People rose to their feet without deciding to. The applause this time didn't sound like congratulations. It sounded like relief. Morning broke with the soft persistence of Carolina's sun. The ranch that had played at being a fairy tale the day before looked like itself again. Grass a little trampled, chairs gone, the lake unbothered by anyone's happiness. Elena stood on the porch of the small guest cottage with a mug of coffee and hair unpinned. Ben came out carrying 2 plates of waffles, which felt like a vow even without words. An old sedan turned into the gravel drive and stopped. Marian stepped out, smoothing the front of her blouse as if clothing could apologize for arriving. "Told you I'd come," she said, when Elena ran down the steps. "You promised," Elena replied, and the answer had a child's relief in it. Inside, the kitchen smelled like butter and syrup and an ordinary life, the kind that puts its elbows on the table. Ben fussed around too many options. Marian teased him that no man should be allowed to call himself a cook if his eggs looked like that. They ate. They told small stories first, the safe kind, about how the florist had tried to fix the wind, how the band leader had carried 4 different handkerchiefs. Then the larger ones came and set their plates down on the table. Marian told Elena about the morning she had been told to leave, about how she had packed in silence because she had been raised to take sorrow to the bus stop and not let it sit on the front steps. She described the way she had returned her house key to the kitchen hook and how she had touched the door frames on the way out, the way her mother had taught her, blessing what you won't see again. "I wrote you," Elena said, voice tight with old effort. "Dozens of letters, I thought." "They kept them," Marian answered simply. "Not all of them." "I got 2. I kept them in a shoebox with a pair of Easter shoes I never wore much, and every time I opened it, I thanked God you still knew my name." They were quiet a long time. Ben washed plates he didn't need to wash and pretended faucets require attention. Marian pulled a folded paper from her tote and slid it across the table. The handwriting had the careful, rounded script of someone taught to make words look as obedient as possible. "Your favorite," she said. "I used to bake it for your birthday. Thought you might want it now that you've got your own kitchen to boss around." Elena smoothed the recipe for sweet potato pie as if it were a map. "We'll make it today," she said. "We'll mess it up and call Nora to ask how much is a pinch." "That girl could run a county with nothing but a whisk," Marian said. And just like that, they were inside a family where the calendar mattered less than the table. After they cleaned up, Elena took Marian to the little desk in the corner and showed her the beginnings of the Quiet Hands Fund. "We'll start small," she said, "and we'll let it grow honest. I've already asked a lawyer to draw up the trust for you. No strings, just room." Marian traced the edge of the paper with one finger. "I never expected my name on anything but a paycheck," she said. "It's been on me all this time," Elena said, and it felt like speaking a new language she had known long before. They sat on the porch until the day shook itself awake. They told more stories. Some of them hurt, and they let them. Others made them laugh until the quiet neighbors of grief came out to see what the noise was about. When Marian left, it was not with a promise to write or to find time. It was with a standing date for supper next week, and a directive from Ben to bring an appetite and an opinion about grilled corn. The house felt larger, but not lonelier after she drove away. Elena found she could breathe in rooms she had always held her breath in. She wrote a list of names, nannies and housekeepers and caregivers she remembered from other houses, women whose stories lived in whispers during polite conversation. She wrote, "Find them," at the top. News about the wedding did what news does when it carries the weight of a sigh people have been needing to let go. An article appeared first in a friend's post, then in a local paper, then on a national site not known for weddings. The reporter asked for photos of the dress, and got instead a picture of a locket. We could talk about sleeves, Elena said on the phone, or we could talk about who zips them and who sings to the girls wearing them. If the internet is a noisy place, it can sometimes hear music. Stories arrived in Elena's inbox with subject lines like, "She raised me, and we called her Tia, and I wish I had said thank you." A man in Ohio wrote about the woman who taught him English one bedtime story at a time and died before he could pay for her funeral. A teacher in Mississippi sent a photo of the small plaque her school had added to the staff room in honor of the custodian who kept blankets and crackers in a little cabinet labeled "Emergencies." A woman in Queens wrote only, "I have no pictures," and beneath it, "Is it okay that I still remember the smell of her lotion?" Elena read them all. She cried in reasonable ways and unreasonable ones. She called Nora, who said, "We'll need someone to sort the applications," as if the world had gone ahead and happened and they were catching up. Ben built a spreadsheet and shook his head at the way need makes numbers feel smaller and bigger at the same time. Caroline called one afternoon with the careful tone of someone trying to re-enter a room they left abruptly. "Your father and I saw the article," she said. "It was very moving." "It was true," Elena answered. Silence gripped the phone line like a hand not used to holding anything. "We did what we thought was best," Caroline murmured. "I'm done arguing about the past," Elena said, surprising herself with how little sharpness lived in it. "I'm inviting you into the future. Marion will be at our house Sunday. So will we. Come if you want. We'll save you some pie." It took 3 Sundays for Caroline to appear. When she did, she wore pearls and an expression that had never learned to ask forgiveness. Marion met her at the door with a dish towel over one shoulder and said, "You're just in time to stir." Caroline took the wooden spoon like it might burn her and stirred. It was what passed for a beginning between them. Some beginnings dressed down. Edward came the next week with a bag of peaches and a look that recognized at last the shape of his daughter's face when she was brave. He asked Marion if she needed anything fixed around the house, and she handed him a drawer that had been sticking since Friday. He repaired it poorly and felt better. He apologized to Elena without using the word apologize, and she let him because life is almost never neat and still manages to be beautiful. The Quiet Hands Fund found an office in a low building with old brick and room for a mural. Elena asked a local artist to paint a series of hands across the wall. Large ones and small ones, black and brown and pale, wrinkled and smooth, each holding something ordinary: a book, a spoon, a thermometer, a tiny sneaker. Below them ran a ribbon of words people had sent. Nothing lofty, just small sentences someone had carried for a lifetime. "She taught me to sleep when I was sad." "He made extra sandwiches on field trip days." "She bought me a blue dress when my mother forgot." Every time Elena walked in, she felt like she had done something correctly, not perfectly, but correctly. They started with counseling vouchers and microgrants for elder care, with help for women to get certifications, with legal aid for unpaid wages. They offered a Saturday storytelling circle where a microphone sat on a stool, and anyone could tell about the time they stayed, and the time they left, and the time they weren't paid, and the time a child kept a scrap of their hair. Marion came to every session. She didn't talk at first. She made coffee and set out napkins, and then, one afternoon when the story about the blue dress made everyone go quiet, she went up and told about the door frames and the blessing. She did not cry. She did not need to. The room did it for her. A year later, Elena and Ben hosted a small celebration under the same trees where everything had changed. No arch this time. Only tables and mismatched plates, and a band that knew how to play quietly when people needed to talk. The fund had helped 300 families and paid for 3 funerals when there was no one left to pay. The mural wall had become the place where people stood and traced words they didn't know they remembered. Marion wore a lavender dress, again the same one, altered at the waist with the unflappable neatness of a woman who could fix anything if you gave her a safety pin and a minute. She carried herself without apology. Children whom she had never met brought her flowers like she was a storybook grandmother and sat in her lap without asking. Caroline helped in the kitchen, finding that her hands knew more than her voice had ever learned. Edward insisted on grilling and burned 2 batches cheerfully. Ben took the microphone at dusk and told the story of the first time he saw Elena cry in front of him, how it had frightened and honored him in equal measure, how she had explained the difference between privacy and erasure, like a professor who had brought cookies to class. Nora toasted with lemonade and said, "To the kind of bravery that doesn't mind chopping onions." People laughed and then looked toward Marion as if she were the center of gravity, which she was. Elena didn't plan to speak. She had talked enough for a lifetime that first day. But when the cicadas wound up their summer song and the sky turned the gentle bruise color of goodbye, she stood with her hands empty and her heart full. "I was taught that to be a lady meant to keep yourself," she said. "Turns out, the keeping was what hurt. I don't know who needs to hear this, but if there is someone at the last row of your life, bring them up. You can still have good china and good grief. They are not enemies." After people drifted home, Marion stayed to wrap leftovers. They moved around each other with the ease of old music. Elena paused with a container halfway to the fridge. "Do you ever wish we had found each other earlier?" she asked. Marion put down the foil. "I wish for many things," she said. "I wish your little self had known how to demand. I wish your mama had known how to soften. I wish I had been braver in the kitchen that morning. But wishing is like rocking in a chair. Busy, but you don't go nowhere. We're here now. That's a miracle big enough to feed for years." Elena leaned against the counter and felt, with sudden clarity, how right the kitchen was as a place for revelations. "I have one more thing," she said, and opened the small velvet box. "It's not to make up for anything. It's to mark what is." The locket inside held a photo Nora had coaxed out of an attic album, Marion holding a toddler with hair a riot of dark curls, both of them laughing the same laugh. "My lord," Marion whispered, "where'd you find this old thing?" "Where all the best things hide," Elena said. "In a box labeled Christmas lights." Marion turned the locket in her hand and nodded. "You give me a fancy thing, I'm going to wear it to the grocery store," she warned. "That's the plan," Elena smiled. "Let the whole produce aisle see what they're really looking at." They locked the office door together the next day. They called a cab for Miss June 2 blocks over, whose knees had decided to retire. They took a call from an agency director who wanted to pay back wages but didn't know how to do it without admitting to having withheld them. "By admitting it," Elena said, and then smiled because sometimes the answer is that simple and that hard. They sat with a woman who had left her job because a child had bitten her to bleeding and no one had called it what it was. They mailed a box of disposable cameras to a group in Detroit that met with grandmothers on Sundays, so someone would finally photograph the hands that prayed the casseroles into enough. The world, as it does, went on being itself. People remained complicated. Mistakes continued to happen right alongside mercy. Elena and Ben learned to fight kindly and to forgive slowly, and to leave notes on the fridge that were not about milk. Caroline became the person who brought Tupperware and didn't require it back. Edward found reasons to fix things that were not broken, and slowly realized that fixing was another word for staying. Marion kept singing the lullaby to whoever needed it, babies, mothers of babies, men who were trying hard not to be their fathers, Elena on nights when memory knocked too late. On the anniversary of the wedding, they returned to the last row with 2 folding chairs and a paper sack of sandwiches. No one else was there. The lawn had been rented to a corporate picnic earlier. The smell of charcoal sulked around the oaks. Elena set a chair for Marion and one for herself. "You think they'd mind if we stole some of their shade?" Marion asked. "They can send security," Elena said, "and we'll tell them it's a sacred spot." Marion chewed slowly and looked toward the strip of water that refused to stop being itself no matter what happened nearby. "You know what I thought that day?" she asked. "That I looked like I was about to faint?" Elena offered. "That too," Marion grinned. "But I thought, Lord, don't let this child trip. She's about to change her whole life in public. At least let her stay upright." "I almost did," Elena confessed. "Right when you stood up." "That's because you were shedding a skin," Marion said. "It's messy work. You held your feet under you. That's all any of us can do when the truth comes." Elena placed her hand on Marion's, the slow, sure pressure that says without fanfare, "Here." A dragonfly buzzed around them like a stitch being pulled through cloth. "Do you think," Elena asked, "there's a version of us somewhere that never got split apart?" Marion considered. "Maybe," she said. "But then we'd have missed the part where you taught a whole crowd to see what they put in the last row. Maybe we were meant to do it the hard way, so somebody else won't have to." They sat until the light thinned and made lace out of the leaves. They packed up their chairs, leaving behind nothing but the indentations of metal feet in grass that would spring back by morning. When they reached the gravel, Elena looked once more at the last row. "Thank you," she said aloud, to the space, to the story, to the woman beside her, to the girl she had been who had kept a braid in a handkerchief because she did not know how to keep anything else. Marion started the car. "Baby Bird," she said, the name working its old spell of blessing without sentimentality. "Let's go home." They did, and the road unspooled in front of them like something forgiving. The house they returned to did not require a certain voice at a certain hour, and if a lullaby was ever needed, there were 2 women in it who knew every note by heart. In the middle of her wedding, a bride stops the music to honor the black woman in the last row, the caregiver who truly raised her. What follows turns a ceremony into healing, exposes quiet erasure, and sparks a foundation for the invisible hands that build our families. Share your own caregiver story in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss the next everyday miracle.